message on the group and say hold my live stream yeah. I'm gonna go. Unless you don't have to go, just hold my live stream there. Just hold my live stream there. So someone else needs to change it.
Alright, hi everyone. Welcome to the ESL Semis. Firstly, congratulations to all teams for making it this far. In opening government, we have HSE Moscow A. In opening opposition, Comillas A. In closing government, Jerusalem B. And in closing opposition, Northwest A. I'll be your chair. Mark you for pronoun is she or they. I'll let the panelists introduce themselves and then we'll quickly do a round of the speakers and then after that we'll start the debate.
I'm Daniel. Any pronouns are fine.
I'm Chuanjan.
Dana.
Yahweh, he, she.
Emily, she or they.
Liam, he or they.
OG.
Alex speaking first, he or they.
Michael speaking second, no preference.
Oh.
Javier speaking first, no preference. Antonio speaking second, no preference.
And CG.
Eli first, he or they.
So second, he or they.
CO.
Here, no preference.
Z, any male pronouns.
Cool. Alright, just a reminder to all members of the audience, keep your discussion to a minimum, try not to make noise, try to enter and exit the room between speeches. Alright, without further ado, I now invite the Prime Minister.
Honorable panel, human mind is incredibly complicated and not transparent. However, thousands of bureaucrats every day are making millions of decisions that affect human lives directly, and we have no way to check what are the real reasons behind them. Whether they follow the rules that society has chosen for them, or they are full of biases and maybe are even openly racist. We bring you 2 points. Firstly, why the system is more explicit, more legitimate, and secondly, why this system leads to less biases and more transparency. So, what's the model? We are talking about, of course, the implementation of decisions that were made by the legislative power, and we will run algorithms that are based on certain characteristics that we think are legitimate. So, for instance, when we choose to whom we want to give human organs, we will use something like expectant additional years, whatever society has chosen, whatever people have voted for, and whatever like the legislative power has decided. So, maybe for criminal justice, it will be something how likely you are going to commit future crime. And also, like, everything we believe is important as a variable, we will include. Everything we think is irrelevant here, we will exclude. If we think that, like, the racial bias should not exist in our society, as we probably do, we will exclude, like, racial data from this decision, if we think it's important. We will also publish all the algorithm. It will be like open source data, so people can choose. It will be transparent. They can choose how the algorithm works. That's the first thing. And secondly, we will publish like easy explanation for the lay public in order for all the society to understand how exactly this mechanism works. And all the people in the society will know what are the variables that are taken into account in this decision. So, to my substantive. Firstly, why it's more legitimate. We believe that the system, when we choose explicitly what are the variables that are taken into account when a certain decision made, is inherently better than when the decisions are made by the very obscure body of people who are like making decisions on the ground every day, and we never know what are the real reasoning behind decisions when they do. Like, we are debaters, we know that you can defend anything, you can always explain that you did this particular decision because you believe like in equality, in transparency, in whatever society has chosen. However, you're never sure that this person has not like choose one person over another in case of human organ donations, not because he's racist, for instance, and not because for some other personal biases that I will explain later are inherent in human nature. So we think that it's principally better that these people have, it's principally better that we have a direct say over all the people here, like over the whole mechanism. Secondly, we think that this mechanism is significantly more responsive. What does it mean? It means that if society thinks that something is wrong with the algorithm that is making decision, it's relatively easy to change it. It's relatively easy to change the code because we just vote for a different variable to be included, and in the next day, like in the next month, we can change the algorithm, which will be much better. In a comparison, in the current world, in order to change that, we need to change the minds of thousands and thousands of people who are making this decision. It is incredibly more complicated, and that is why it cannot be done as fast. No, thank you. We think that why it's important, firstly, because people have a principal right to influence directly the process of giving these benefits, and also we think that people are more likely to participate in the process in the first place, because now they feel that they can influence directly. That's the first thing. But secondly, they see exactly how the decision is made, because they see this algorithm, they see the explanation that we have provided, and if they believe that something is wrong with the variables that are included, or with the weighing of these variables, or something like this, or with the criteria that we have chosen, they are more likely to participate in that. In a comparison, when these are like thousands of bureaucrats, they are not very interested, because they understand that even if they change the general rule behind that they can follow, it doesn't necessarily mean that the decisions on the ground will be changed. Secondly, why it leads to less biases and more transparency. So first of all, it's very important to understand that human mind has many biases, like is inherently problematic. 3 reasons for that. Firstly, we have lots of preconception about different characteristics of humans, such as, for instance, race, or such as, for instance, your social status. These biases are based on your daily interaction with certain people. So if you interact with people, based on your interaction with people, you may assume that people of certain race or of a certain social status have certain internal characteristics. Even if you do not want to be racist, it is still likely that you will have this preconception. And that is why people, for instance, it's impossible to change even with education. For instance, doctors prescribe more painkillers to men because they believe that, if man is crying, it's something really significant. If woman is crying, it's probably not that important, even though it's they are taught not to do so. Secondly, we think that human mistake may have a huge impact on the decision-making process. So, for instance, there's an empirical fact that after a lunch, judges are 50% more likely to release prisoners. Even though it's something absolutely irrelevant, people are still animals, and that is why we are not in full control of our decision. We think that when human lives are at stake, we cannot afford that. Before I go on, yes.
Yeah, where would the data be taken from, and for how many years would the data be relevant, and how much data in each decision will be present?
We think that we will collect data from the people that we already do, based on all the characteristics that are important. So, for instance, in case of medical decisions, we collect all the data that is relevant in terms of your health, and we will make a decision based on the number of expected years. If it's something about criminal justice, we will get all the information about your behavior in the past and about other certain characteristics that we as a society think are important. If we believe that we do not have enough data, we will not implement this. It's very important. So the third thing about the inherent bias of human minds is that people are much more prone to corruption, because you have thousands of officials, and it's enough to bribe one official to make a decision better for you. It's especially relevant in case of the criminal justice system. You cannot corrupt the algorithm, or at least it's significantly more difficult, because there is only one algorithm, which is also transparent and available for everyone. It's also very important to note that people will be able to get to understand this mechanism, because the IT and computer science is the most popular major in the universities now. Millions of people are coding, and that is why open source data will be available for many people to understand and to get. So why our mechanism leads to less bias? Firstly, as I said, it's easier to fix. If we see there is a bias, if we see data that more black people are sentences, we will just change it, because there will be political pressure. And secondly, we think that, basically that's it. For all these reasons, very proud to propose.
I thank Prime Minister, and now welcome Leader of Opposition.
Let's clarify just a bit what is the counterfactual that proposes opening opposition. The counterfactual here is to continue taking decision in base of the human view, but of course as this tool is appearing, we will use big data, but I think that what have to be predominant in the decision is the human view of the problem. So you can have support of the data, but the data is not the one which is going to guide the decision. So most of the benefit of this data indicating which is the point which you have to solve, for example, it's also then in opening opposition. What you are not going to do is like maintaining that or putting that power in the data, but maintaining it in the government. 3 contingencies in the case of opening government, and then the other others will be integrated. First contingency is in all this case of the transparency and the human bias. I have 3 things to say. The first thing is that it's almost impossible to the people to understand this. They say that it will be easy and it will be all published, but how is it possible to understand the mathematics that calculate all these results? This is mathematics. We say 2 + 2 + 2 guys to this kind of decision of this kind of problem. This is impossible to understand for most of the people. Secondly, no one is going to read this. This is quite complicated and much more complicated than the actual political programs that the political parties are publishing, and those programs are really like for a 3–4% I think of the population. If you put like mathematics on it and you say how is the problem going in an algorithm, no one is going to read it. But even more important, the third contingency is that it is just the big data. What justice they say is to inspire like the decision. What does this mean? The policy, the big data doesn't say, okay, here is the problem, here's the big data, I give you the solution. No, it just gives you an analysis of the problem which is easy to bias. It gives you like an input of the big data say this, now you have to take the decision. So being guided by big data is also easy to bias that information in your behalf. I think that transparency is not really good. I think that people is not going to understand, and in addition I think that it's really easy to bias precisely because it's more complicated than a political problem. Now, Marquez, which started with a point which I think that interests most of the relevant, which is that this will lead to probably more efficient decisions, but it will be for the quantity and not for the quality. Because how is going to be taken this decision? You will put the big data, you will put like the possible solutions to a problem, and you will say, this gets much success. But we think that the big data is only capable of seeing how is the success in quantity but not in quality. It's easy to see how, for example, this policy view invest in this place, it used to be 2,000 of people the benefit, but you don't know how it affects in the intensity of these people, because for that you need human analysis to know how much affects to the happiness of the person, how much have changed their life. This is not something that cannot be put in data. What does this mean? No, we think that this means that that this is going to be discriminative for the people which is now more discriminated. For example, if you have to decide whether to invest money in the rural areas or the urban areas, clearly the big data is going to say that you have to invest in urban areas because the benefit is going to be greater in amount of how many people is going to benefit from that. Meanwhile, this is not able to see how much influence in the rural area and how deep is the happiness which you can put on there, how much improves the quality of life, because this is something of quality which cannot be measured by data but just for human experience of those people. Therefore, this is going to give a huge narrative for the parties and political parties and forces which don't want to go and invest here and say, okay, the efficiency, the data, the mathematics, which is something which is respected by the population, say, no, go to invest in women affirmative action because this is not efficient. It's more efficient to still go for men. Let's go for the urban areas and not the rural areas because it is more efficient. If I can bias for the efficiency, this is going to be a strong narrative in order to manipulate the popular decision. Second point in this argument now is that this will go, this will continue to discriminate people because it's going. Based in past data, which bears discrimination. But now, no, close it.
Yeah, so the problem is that today governments usually only do some things way too late when the problem is already out there and everybody knows about it. The good things about predictive algorithms and the use of them is that you can know about them before they happen.
I understand. I think that this is also happening in open opposition. We say that we can see the data, but not guiding our decisions in those data. Yeah, we can detect the problem. Nice, but what you are not going is to let you lead the decision by that. The second point in this argument is that it will lead a discrimination because the data are discriminating. What does this mean? If you put, for example, and see which is the criminal data in the United States, you will find that most of the people who commit crimes is poor people and black people because they have been discriminated for years. What will say big data about political and criminal policy in criminal things. We will say that you have to push harder in black people, push harder in poor people because they are the ones which are the focus of the problem. That means that the data is already discriminating because it's not able to see which is the root of the problem. Therefore, the decisions which will be taken following the data will be also discriminated. Actually, in the United States, they try to use big data in order to predict which is the sentence of the judgment, and they found that it fails against black people in an 80% of the cases. Why? Because in Alabama, almost every people which commit a crime is black. Therefore, he should be guilty. It's according to big data, it's discriminated. They will be discriminating black people. And third thing I would say in this argument is that this is these decisions of data will be based in past data, which is really useless in a world which is changing really quickly. We cannot base it or move on investment in the past in the past growth of the country or in the past sectors which go better, because this is in the past and we don't know how it will in the future. No. Second point will be about how this will affect the decision making in many ways. The more important thing here is that the government is able to, in the status quo, is able to invest in things, for example, going to a village and give them electricity, which is not efficient, but which will be good. And this will lead just to efficient decisions, but not good decisions. We think that the case in point here is that you are not able to see the dignity of the people and how this affects the people for good or for bad, but just the efficiency. For example, we say going to the third point, we think that that this also will attack democracy because a key factor, that in the status quo the decisions are taken because, one, the political program that I put in the table, and secondly, what is the people thinking in the polls? What do we think here? We think that if you have the excuse of having the big data by your side, you can change this really easily. You say, okay, I say that, but now the big data is saying that we have to go to another direction, so the accountability of the people will be lesser. We say that in this with this there is a huge excuse in order to change the way I apply policy for what I promise to what I want, using the big data in order to bias the situation. For all these reasons, we think that at the end of the day, this big data is useful in order to have some guidance of what is the problem, but not in order to how deal with that problem, because this discriminating is based in bad data and therefore will lead to worse decisions and to worse treatment for the discriminated people. Thank you very much.
I thank Leader of Opposition. I now welcome Deputy Prime Minister.
Coming from a country which has one of the most democratic and liberal constitutions in the world and de facto dictatorship, we know the value of actual implementation of what people have chosen. I think firstly a couple of responses, then how we actually fulfill the promises of democracy. Firstly, on the issue of bias. Once again, we are going to train algorithms on the data which is already racially biased. Even if 8 millennials in 15 minutes were able to come up with those arguments, I think the governments, which are going to be A, voted out if they implement such policy, B, held criminally liable, will certainly take it into account. At the point when it occurs, for example, 1 month after this policy is passed, and we see that certain indicators that we put into the algorithm do actually produce racially biased results, we can correct it, compare it, contrast it with the millions of bureaucrats which can't be replaced. It's simply too difficult for a government to implement such a radical change. Why? Because the entire functioning of the state will stop, and therefore the trade-off doesn't worth the hassle. But even if we implement, we have some non-racial correlates. We say we would like to take away race from this equivalent. If we see that some other correlates also do indicate or correlate with race, for example, a particular postcode or a particular preference in terms of diet, we can also democratically debate that whether or not we should exclude or include another variable to balance that out. All of that is impossible under their side of the house. But their next response, but we would like people to get guidance from those algorithms and then make decisions. Look, at that point, it doesn't solve half of the issues we identified, but most importantly, it gives the following excuse. I have my own authority in terms of whom I allocate housing or how much prescription I make. Yes, I as a doctor watched some data and then I came up with my decision based on my wisdom, based on my practice, based on many other things. And it's much more difficult to eradicate bias in this case comparatively to completely doing that by the machine. Okay, then they say, but people cannot understand it. Look, we explain to people financial mechanism. For example, many people collect pensions and it's difficult financial mechanism, but we are able to give infographics, to give educational videos, etc. Right? We say we're able to explain it at the point when it's such an important matter. They say, oh, but it will be blind to happiness of the people. No, we can include happiness. We can literally put serotonin and other levels or individual happiness responses. For example, in surveys after a particular policy is implemented to see whether or not that or another change in algorithm is desirable. We can invest specifically in that variable at the point when our model is that it should be democratically decided. But they say that our idea of algorithm based on efficiency is bad. We say that it's extremely good. Why? Because the best look, if the algorithm is biased towards maximizing efficiency, it is going to benefit the most vulnerable the first. Why? Because they have the lowest starting point, so for the algorithm it makes sense to, for example, give housing to the most disenfranchised, to the most poor. Why? Because their level of happiness, their level of well-being, their level of productivity, and as a result input to the economy will increase the most, as opposed to, for example, allowing a particular place within the city to be occupied by some new Walmart or another place which the rich, only rich, will benefit from. So we say that that bias is good, but if it's a good bias, let's implement another one upon a national referendum. Okay. Also, at the point when it doesn't take into account human dignity, no, it takes, if we ever like describe precisely in the words what it means to have a human dignity, we can also put it into that algorithm. Okay, discrimination, why it happens less on our side of the house. Let's before that realize that it's not just abstract language. Discrimination in terms of housing, in terms of healthcare, means sometimes human misery, days and days, like, or sometimes years of life in prison, or instead going like scot-free in a case like if you're white and commit something bad. So look, all of that is less likely to happen on our side of the house. Alex brings you several premises. Let's add some more. As an algorithm, you basically don't have any personal opinion upon any issue. You do not have a convenient excuse of like, I was consulting that data, but later on I came up with another decision. Okay. Also we say that because of all of those biases are absent, because it's much easier to fix you, to rectify a particular mistake rather than eradicating the entire system, it's much more likely to be solved. We know exactly what went wrong when a particular decision comes up with a bad outcome comparatively to human decision. No, thank you. They could say that there is less accountability because we have algorithms making decisions. Look, government outsources many its functions to mechanisms. For example, when there is a blow in a mining sort of industry, right? We still hold company accountable for negligence. We blame them for corruption, for mismanagement, for other things when a particular technology goes wrong. Why? Because they were the one who initiated that, and the government and the public will have a perception that the people who are responsible, first of all, for the outcomes of that algorithms are the ones who proposed it in the first place. So we say that because there is this incentive not to be held liable, and because it's basically, we can easily identify people who should be held accountable. Okay, now why it's more democratic? Because we say right now between pure will of the people, which is supposed to be the promise and of democracy, and the actual outcome for which people want to have, there is a layer of people who are supposed to implement it. By eliminating that, we make democracy more pure, we make democracy much, much better. Also note that sometimes access to resources and efficient redistribution of resources is actually critical and a waste is lethal. Before I proceed to that, closing anything?
Who do we blame and hold accountable when and if something goes wrong?
We blame accountable people who were responsible to the decisions which led to that. We say that public officials who are in charge of implementation of particular decision in the algorithm will be held accountable. You say it's not the people who actually write the code, the people who decide and approve and put the seal of the government upon the code when it's done, right? So we say they have the very same incentive. So it's more democratic. Actually, it's also more efficient. If we know where to put more police units, resources are limited, right? We can't secure every place in the same way. We put police units more in the area where crime is more likely, therefore much fewer people are raped, much less drugs are sold. If we put housing to the most efficient use, to the people who need it the most, as opposed to relatives and people who you know and people of your racial group. We say it's much better allocation of resources in this regard. In terms of redistribution of medicines, because note that even transportation of certain medicines, or for example of organs, which are limited in terms of time where they are efficient, means that we waste a lot of things which could save human life. The same goes for food and many other limited resources. At the point when it's redistributed much better, we say it saves a lot of human misery, prevents a lot of human misery. But lastly, corruption. Look, in Russia there is functioning courts, but basically when government wants to jail someone, they do it very easily. At the point when you have no judges who pass decisions but algorithms, it's much harder to, for example, to put in jail political dissidents for regimes who want to see invalid democratic but actually abuse those institutions. For all of these reasons, incredibly proud to propose it.
I thank Deputy Prime Minister and I welcome Deputy Leader of Opposition.
At the end of this debate, I'm pretty convinced something is going to happen. And this government bench will never going to be able to prove the uniqueness of using this as in the way they are supposed to defend, that is to say, in a large and massive way. Having contended that most of the benefits they're claiming could be used just by getting some data and using it, they never prove why it should be uniquely, massively, just using data would be enough, for example, to predict the things that CG is going to extend on. Rebuttal to OG. They say, first, decision gets less biases. Two rebuttals. First, mitigation. The person who takes decision are normally less biased than the description they made of decisions being biased. So yes, many people are biased, but people taking decisions in government are the less biased in among all the most people. But secondly, they are pretty accountable. So most of the times they're pretty accountable to taking that decision. They have incentive not to take biased decision and to watch out of not taking them because they are accountable through the elections and through pressure of the people. But let me go further and not just mitigate the argument. I want to flip it through a whole argument. I think that it is false that by using data we will be less biased. This is because when you get big data, you aggregate the whole data which is already biased because you take the data of things that are previously biased by the fact that those decisions were taken were already biased. If you're taking decisions of how many judgments were against black people, those decisions were already biased. If you're taking decisions of how many organs were given to X person or to X collective, those decisions were already biased. There is no way in this debate that they prove that collection of aggregate data that already were biased, then by the aggregations become unbiased. This aggregation of data is already biased. What happens is even worse. Due to the aggregation of biased data, now you have the way to claim that you are objective, that you're doing things objectively. So now it is even more biased. This provokes even more biases on population. Second thing OG claims is that it's easy to change if it's wrong or if it's mistaken. Readables. A, have you already told you don't understand? It is very difficult to do it. Not most people have a PhD, maybe the panel do, but most people don't have a PhD. Second, it is not that easy to note when you're making mistakes through the algorithm. It's easy to understand that it is not a mistake per se many times. It's a bad decision in terms of, I don't know, they needed more. So it is not that easy to say this was a mistake or this is precisely biased because I, you don't know, B, you want to support it. Last rebuttal here, but I think it flips also the argument. Decisions have to be justified on that argument and this algorithm. So even if it's wrong, you'll have all of the incentives in the world to say that the algorithm was right because you took decisions based on that argument, hence you're going to support the algorithm as hell because you took your decisions over there. Rebuttal to CG. They say in the POI, this allows prediction, and this is essentially necessary. Two rebuttals here. A, we can predict it already with the same data without being necessary as much. We can predict the next financial crisis. What we're not okay with is to say that this is the response to the financial crisis. We can predict where is some problems, but we don't want to take decisions based on that. We think that even if we need to trade off not prediction, we think that not prediction 100% or just 90% is enough because of all our material. Last line of OG, which could be extended by CG and hence rebuttaling here, is that dictatorial regimes will do whatever the algorithms say. No, probably not. If they want to fuck up people, they will fuck up people through the algorithm. So if there's a government which is fucking up their people and you have like this super algorithm that fuck the people through the algorithm, I don't think this is very smart in the end. No. First argument we brought you is that this will lead to unfair decision making. First part of this argument is that data is able to measure intensity, quantity but not intensity. The only rebuttal they claim is, look, we can put it into the algorithm. It is not true because intensity is not quantifiable as rather people or number of persons. Let's give you an example. So let's say that there's public housing decision to be made. And you say, look, there's like a large number of people living in this place which don't have a house. And there's this little number of people in this other place which are like in bad conditions in the street. The aggregate number will tell you to put those persons into houses, but it can't tell you that those are so fucked up that if you don't put them into the house, they're gonna die. What I'm saying is intensity can't be measured not by an algorithm but anything else, because it's just the intensity of how much you need, and you need human evaluation in that in order to take the decision. The second thing you think is that big data bears every discrimination. I already explained that in my rebuttal, so I'll give forward. Third thing we say in this argument is data is often useful because it's constantly changing. So when you rely on data, you become inefficient because you are relying on facts that are not useful anymore. Let me give you another example. If I'm relying on data that tell me that giving a kidney to X person is useful, that data is previous data. It might have fucking changed because things in our world change so fast. So using data in the past and relying so much on the past data not enables people to take decisions based on the present. In our world, in the 21st century, when we change so fast, it is so important. No. That's the first argument. Second argument we bring to you is that leads to prioritization of efficient but not very good decision. Rebuttal they claim is intelligence, which is no, because we will take the decisions that will maximize utility. This is not true because of several reasons. Maximization of utility is not something easy to aggregate. Let me give you one example. It is utilitarianly smart to have death penalty in a country because it deters. Probably you would say no, but what? It deters. The point is that we don't want to have that death penalty because we respect a higher value, which is human dignity. The algorithm will tell us 2-point death penalty because it deters, so we think this is unbearable. Let's have another example. And it's not very efficient decision, but which need to be done by many states because it's principally good, is to give education to poor people. It is not maximizing utility because in most of the cases, those persons won't ever achieve anything because they have many problems. Yes, the point.
Your analysis is completely not comparative. Yes, an ideal human being would be better than an algorithm, but could you please compare it with the real bureaucrats who have mediocre education and are tired of making decisions, that's why they don't really care?
It is comparative. What I say is those could be bad, but giving them just the decision by this algorithm justifies every decision they make through the algorithm, which is biased already and which is not to be able to take decisions. Lastly, we said that this would harm democracy. This continues the argument on democracy they bring. What we say here is that this gets far the decision from the people and give this to the government. Why is it true? Because we think that when politicians can say you're taking this through this argument or through this algorithm, it's far more easy to justify bad policies. For example, no one in hell would have said, for example, closing borders and expelling everyone of the country. But if the algorithm says it's plausible, it's efficient, then it's far more easy to those politics to say just do it because the algorithm says so. It's far more easy to justify not good policies because of those algorithms. At the end of the debate, none of the things they're going to prove are exclusive to it massively. We can have the data, but being able to process, even with mediocrity, that data enables us to have many benefits. We think all wins the debate. Thanks.
I thank the opening half, now the closing half member of government.
Okay.
section. One is going to be on how this algorithm helps us solve problems that we know of and problems that we yet do not. Second of all, on why this shifts the way the government works to proactive treatment of the problem of people instead of reactive. But before that, let's clarify this debate. We believe that opening government set up a sensible mechanism of an algorithm which aggregates data and then tells us probabilities of things by which we can make decisions instead of a bunch of bureaucrats at every step of the way discussing things with each other and things getting lost in the process. Opening opposition contends that this algorithm is clearly Skynet. Why? Because they say this algorithm sets its own efficacy in ignoring opening government, saying we're going to set the metrics. They're saying this algorithm is going to write policy by closing borders. It is unclear why a data predictive modeling, something we insert data to, tell what we want to optimize for, what are our goals, is now going to write policy that is going to murder people. That is insane. But furthermore, we say, when opening opposition tells us that what they want in their counterfactual is for people to look at the data and use it in order to make decisions. First of all, it is unclear that is not the motion. Second of all, we say, because they say you want to decide by data, and they say they don't want to be guided by data. But furthermore, after that, and the rest of the material contradicts that, because they say that this data is completely biased, but they want you to decide by it. They say that this data cannot be trusted because the past does not predict the future. We say two things. One, again, why do you want to decide by that? And two, if that is true, then humans cannot decide everything because we do everything by what we know, right? That is absurd. Even if serotonin might be a bit of a stretch, we say that at least an algorithm can have surveys of what people like and how much they like it. What is the comparative they give us? They tell us politicians work by long cycles and don't often go and check how these policies happen in the field, how people are happy with this, what happens. They just look at the next election cycle and maybe then they check it, right? That is absurd. Finally, opposition tells us that it's hard to understand and very few experts are going to read these incredibly complex policies in order to do that. That kind of sounds like the oversight of today. We have incredibly complex governmental policies and then very few experts can go over them. That is oversight of government on either side of this debate, right? Now that we've done with this nonsense, let's go to find the actual solutions for the problems of people. First of all, we say, in the exposing of patterns, because while opening government does tell us that people are kind of set in their way, they don't make the comparative of how exactly is the algorithm not. We say, for example, when looking at allocating healthcare, an example from the motion, we say that quite often you have a lot of healthcare issues who go unattended simply because nobody ever bothered asking about it. For example, women African American women in the United States have a disproportionately higher death rate while giving birth than white women. We say that when allocating healthcare, it is more likely that the algorithm would go, okay, we predict that these are the main risk factors, right? Here are the situation of that person's life. Here are the main risk factors. Notice at which point it also flips opening opposition's case, because everything that they tell us about how this algorithm was incredibly effective in one instance where it clearly identified poor people and black people and used to harm them, means it is also very good at identifying poor people and people who are in need of housing, for example, when we allocate the housing needs of individuals who might lose their house. Who are the people we need to look at and where should we be actually checking with them? In that sense, we say it exposes patterns that actually enable us better allocation of the policies, because quite likely we're not going to make full country legislature, because country legislature, state legislature, is often broad and abstract, because that is the nature of politics. It's going to use it in actually setting how this legislature comes into play in changing human judgment. That is the bureaucracy that opening was talking about, at which point we say it makes it significantly better, both in actually treating the problem that people have that we often miss, and secondly, in treating the problems that we already know of but want to deal with more effectively. At which point we say it's going to break people out of their comfort zone, show us what the problems are, and even if it is bad, it shows our biases to them, and so we can actually fix them. Right? For all these reasons, we say that is better. But before I continue, I will take opening.
Yeah, your point is that people which is in the government is bad and biased, and therefore we put an algorithm which do things great. You don't have the fear to say that bad people will program an excellent and inclusive algorithm. How in hell is possible that Putin or Trump, which have to program the algorithm, are going to be so good doing it?
So I would not say that Putin or Trump are going to program an algorithm, if only because that is absurd, right? What I would say is when the government sets to actually implement a policy, they have to decide what to allocate. That is the actual allocation of funds, even under status quo, is not done by Trump, but by actual people within the government who do this work. We say at this point, we have a third party, likely an expert, or even not a third party, but experts within the government who are hired specifically to program and maintain these algorithms, who are set the goals, who work closely with them in order to translate our notion of what do we want to maximize and what are our goals in this, in order to help set an algorithm which predicts what are the risk factors, who are the individuals we need to give this the most. Similarly how today when we have healthcare programs, we have people deciding, oh, all of these people might set the criteria, who do we think need it the most, and who are that? We say an algorithm is better at actually deciding how to allocate this as the motion states. Furthermore, we say this makes the government more proactive and less reactive, because what happens nowadays is that problems occur. We often don't know about them because looking at the data is not as opening opposition themselves. Oh, come on, a person could do that. It is a shit ton of data. And maybe Dan could do that, but humans cannot, right? We say that most people cannot just look at the entire data of the country and go, that is the risk factor. At which point we say it is more likely that, first of all, as the algorithm grows over time, because we continuously aggregate information, it is more likely to hone in on problems as they are occurring, rather than after they've reached the point where they exploded, the government has to put out fires and put out quick and dirty policies rather than actually taking care of them. Second of all, we say it cuts a massive amount of time between we have gathered the data to our people are looking at the data to we need to look how we do this, because when we allocate, we actually see who are the people in need. Where does this money go? At which point we say that we do support this algorithm in implementing where does money go? How do we allocate services? We believe a government should be more proactive by constantly aggregating data and taking care of its citizens. And we believe that it is more likely that we would give accurate taking care of their actual problems. For all these reasons, oppose.
I thank member of government. I now welcome member of opposition.
Human dignity is destroyed when you write it in ones and zeros. Today, House, I will be explaining first to give a little bit of context about the efficacy of these systems, giving some real-world examples, because I feel that this is something that's being thrown about in the opening half of this debate a lot. Try to address that. Then I'll be addressing the issues of bias and explaining why government's model doesn't actually remove or reduce bias from the system, right? And then I'm going to come to our even if argumentation. Even if government gives their best, even if these systems work like they do, why we still prefer a world in which we do not give over policy making, and especially the people's knowledge that we are making policies according to these algorithms, right? So coming firstly to an independent point of rebuttal on what closing government especially said, there was this issue of bias about, whether there's still bias in the system and so on and so on and so on. And, asking the system about, well, asking the question of how can humans ever decide anything if everything is so biased? Well, that's simply how it works. Everything is biased. You can, you can question everything, but still at the end of the day, we make decisions based on human intuition, and most of the time that actually ends up working. It's when you try to program a perfect system and act like it doesn't have bias, don't acknowledge the fact that bias exists. That's when your problems start And that's what we are proposing as opposition, right? So coming first to some understanding of how these algorithms actually work and some limitations on how these algorithms work, because there's been a lot of debate about whether actually these algorithms will work. Let's see, right now we do actually have examples of where billions and billions and billions and billions of dollars have been invested into making these algorithms work, right? We see that in the stock market, where we have a certain set of variables and quantifiables and massive amounts of data, and several companies have been spending billions of dollars over a very long time to try to get that perfect algorithm to predict just what the market is going to do. And quite frankly, we see that this isn't working. If you've looked at the stocks today, you'll see we're kind of not in a good place right now, and we don't see one company getting the secret recipe and then ruling the stock market, right? There are a couple of reasons for this. The first being that human existence cannot be quantified in these simple terms. And to make this evident, what the government is proposing is that we apply these principles to broader policy-based things, criminal justice, issues of morality, and yet we cannot even conceivably do it at the moment in a much more narrow set of variables, right? In fact, the current trend in trying to understand the world around us is moving away from trying to understand the world in these specific set of variables, because we realize that that's biased and kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy, where we chase things that change these variables themselves and not things that actually improve the quality of human life. That's why you see the Human Happiness Index in economics becoming a thing now, right? And then secondly, another problem in terms of AI that the government doesn't address is that this AI or smart interpretation of big data usually works on an iterative process, right? So we try something, see if it works, and it fails, and until you get the right one. Otherwise, you have to work with biases. And in terms of government policy, we're working with things where we only see the results really 50 or 100 years in the future. That simply isn't applicable. So it's not really a good case that they have as to why this data is going to solve the problem entirely, right? Now coming to our a further important argument as to why this is really a problem, is there exists no such thing as a perfect system. Even in the way that government has tried to describe this system, in the best possible way with the smartest algorithms, they're still inputting human decisions in that, because someone has to decide what is data. Someone has to decide what is it that we want the data to achieve. And in all those levels, we have human bias playing into the system. But yet what government then proposes is saying that, oh no, this system is free for bias or has less bias, making us less able to hold that bias accountable or recognize that bias, because now we trust this system so much, right? And this is where we really need that human intuition and human ambiguity in the system. And let's talk a little bit more about that, because we need to know that there's bias and we need to hold people accountable for the bias instead of trying to have this idea of this perfect system. And what we furthermore see is that in this incredibly complex system, which we're saying is so free of bias and all of these things, right? Where we still have human bias in terms of programming, in terms of policy, in terms of that little rule which says we cannot discriminate against black people even though the data says this. The system is going to be fraught with these kinds of regulations. And who controls that is an ever smaller part of the intellectual and ruling elite who decide how we're going to implement these policies. So we see a further concentration of policy in an ever smaller part of the like technocratic ruling class. And we feel that that's very problematic.
Yes, so you're rehashing of our side. Even if there is bias at every step, we say, let's cut a lot of these steps with a lot of that bias and replace them with a system that is better at predicting the problems of people in an unbiased manner.
Yeah, that's what you're saying, but I don't see how you're doing it, because you say we want a system that doesn't have bias, but every time we point out a problem with the system, you say, oh no, we're going to have a human corrected by implementing this kind of coding or something like that, right? And now, coming to the even if argumentation, right? Even if we have this system, and even if the system mostly works, we find two major problems with the system. The first being that we're going to see, disenfranchisement from the system, because we're living in a limited world, right? Where no system is perfect, no matter how perfect they try to make us. And we're going to see people being left behind, right? But what this does, because people know, because the government is propagating this idea, oh, we've got this brilliant system that really doesn't make mistakes. If I'm on the ground, if I'm a person who is, the system has elected to exclude me from certain resources, the system has elected, like, okay, you're going to have to, pull the short end of the stick this time. It's going to disempower me from actually driving or trying to make any change. Because who am I to challenge this perfect system? Who can I hold accountable for my suffering? And we find that very problematic because it dooms the poor to really being poor and to being told, oh, you're poor because that's the only way it can be. And that's not a life we want to give to these people. That's not a life we want to give to ourselves. And then finally, human dignity requires ambiguity. Morality becomes destroyed when we describe in the perfect system, where the things people do are the necessary result of all these rules that we've quantified in the system. That's why we can never hold anyone accountable under the system, because even the bureaucrat who made that decision then was just reacting on the data he was given, right? And we feel that this removes the human sense of agency. It removes my drive in life because I am just a product of my circumstances. And we see that that's not a world that we want to live in. We are very proud to oppose that.
I thank member of government, member of opposition. I now welcome government. He for you! He for you! He for you!
CEO's case is incredibly baffling because it is in no way comparative. Like, maybe data is the root of all evil in the world. Given it is still used on both sides of the debate, the fact that you can't quantify the human experience, the fact that morality is lost when it's all about numbers, like literally all of that, everything we just heard is true on our side. He was never comparative to what is their side of the debate, which is those algorithms which we spend billions on still exist, and experts advise them, but they are not constantly monitoring and making decisions on the ground, which is what we propose. Literally, this is enough of a rebuttal to all of CG's case, but let's make sure that we don't miss anything else. They say everything happens in iterations. Yes, every government policy on their side is also iterative. You check data, see how it went, and move on. He says it's not perfect. Yes, neither is their system. He says people would think it's a perfect system. Why? We don't know why people would think it's a perfect system if they have so cleverly thought up that this is not a perfect system, and whenever it was used in the world, people also realized that there are some problems with it. We don't understand why people think it's perfect and never criticize everyone or hold anyone accountable. It makes no sense. The fact that you only see results in a few years, also again in their side to for any policy, that seems to be enough. Good, let's talk about actual debate. Two questions in this debate. One, let's talk about efficiency. Two, let's talk about bias. I wanted to start first of all about efficiency because I think that at no point government opposition has really shown that the biases are like terrible, are like way worse than what we have in the status quo. So like even if they win biases on like a fraction, we will win efficiency on a lot. What do we have here? Look, OG already told you that there is efficiency in the most basic sense, that this is an algorithm made to be optimize certain situations. However, point a good answer. They say, look, if this is true, experts can just look at what algorithms say and be advised by it. What is the problem? Why do you need the algorithm to make the decision themselves? Those are two answers that we have given you in CG. We told you A, it's the fact that experts just don't think of everything like an algorithm do. Why? Exactly because as you say, those are experts who have studied the field for a long time. They have their own biases. They think that the world works a certain way, so they don't see the need to even look at the entire data. Our algorithm does that, and because of that, it can see stuff that those not. Like for example, how race can affect the kind of treatment that you get in a hospital, or the treatment that you should get in a hospital. if you're poor, it means there is a chance you would commit to a certain drug. So maybe you should give you another drug that you can commit to as a poor person, and so on. The mere fact that most medical experts don't think even to ask questions about how much that person earns is exactly something that only an algorithm do. We bring you that in CG. Secondly, we say the fact about it's proactive. We say, look, that expert is not just like he says, aha, I found new data, now I do everything that I want. No. Have you ever met bureaucracy? They are going to look at something. Then they're going to wait to make sure that they're sure it's not just a minor thing. Then they're going to debate it with other friends that have collected maybe different data. Then they're going to ask for permission to implement some policy. They will tell them, no, check the data again, just to be sure. They do it. Then eventually, like sometimes, I don't know, weeks later, months later, they actually can do something. The fact that this algorithm, I told you, is constantly monitoring, is constantly updating, constantly changing, meaning that it can do things that you could never do otherwise, and predict things that you wouldn't deal with until the point it was too late. Politicians were like, oh geez, we really should do something about it. We finally have found the time and the money to do that. Exactly for all those reasons, we say you have to make that algorithm the root of how you do everything, of how you allocate every day and every minute, how you allocate the funds to schools, how you allocate the funds to hospitals, how you fund it to police officers, and so on. One more thing that was here. Oh yes, government says it can. Government officials will not be able to abuse you that way. Or is correct in pointing out that you can make also an abusive government algorithm. Both of those are not in the debate. We're talking about functioning democracy. At the point where you have an algorithm that is abusing your population, you're probably not that much functioning as a democracy anymore. Before I move on to my second question about biases, let's take first. Sure.
Yeah, in our world, somehow mediocre biased humans keep taking decisions, but our control include dignity. In your world, those exact mediocre and biased humans collect data which is biased and then take mediocre decisions which are confirmed by the mediocre and biased data.
Again, there are very few people doing it. We don't understand what mediocre data means or why biased data means, but please notice on their side they also take this mediocre data. This is what we literally ask them every time. We're saying, okay, why is it better than that the algorithm handled this biased data rather than a human? Bringing us perfectly to our second point. Look, both opening house is very correct that you have biases on both sides. Data can be biased too. What do we tell you on that? We say, look, the fact that you have biased data is not the problem today. The problem is that you have biased goals. When you are saying, oh, it's not that I really want to take care of all human beings for example, in my medicine, because when those experts think about human beings, they really, for example, thinking only of white people, or only think of men. The minute that algorithm that does not care for that, it only cares for the specific goals, and every point of data means the same to it, and saving all humans is the same to it, then that biased data becomes an advantage. Now, unlike the policymakers who might not care about certain population, the data cares for all of them the same and finds solutions to specific populations. So that problem is now better on our side. Secondly, as OG are correct, and let's point it out, if you have some kind of problem, then yes, you can just change the goals. The opposition keeps telling you, no, but you can never change it because it is justified by the mighty algorithm. Why? On their side, is it justified by the mighty expert? We don't understand why the mighty expert is different from the mighty algorithm on their side. There is no change on that. There is a change in about, and this is important, what is the default? Because the default of any expert is, as we told you, its prior knowledge and prior biases. But the basis, the default of any goal of an algorithm is to be fair, is to not care about race, it's to care about maximizing whatever you want for everyone to an equal amount. For that we beg you to propose.
I thank Government Whip. I now invite Opposition Whip.
Viva Africa, viva! Viva! Mandla! So what we really like about a human system that decides policies is that the human system can keep itself in check. The reason why we were able to reverse Donald Trump's ban on Muslims is because we took it to courts. Imagine Donald Trump in their world with so much power, he would, by executive order, have people write an algorithm. The algorithm will ban Muslim people from particular countries to entering the United States. When people challenge this algorithm, we don't take it to a constitutional court, we take it to the same algorithm. That same algorithm upholds that same decision. That is one thing that is very bad that we don't get from their side, right? But then they try to mitigate this harm. When they want to mitigate this harm, then they say, if an algorithm doesn't work, then we change it. At a point at which you change it, you're coming to our side because you're putting in the human factor to change that algorithm. Why don't you stay on our side anyway, right? That's one thing that the entire government bench misses in this debate. So a couple of independent rebuttals, then we come to the comparative, right? First, the opening government tells us if the algorithm is not okay, then we change it. The comparative that they tell us is that on the other side, on the side that we have people managing these systems, then you have to convince the minds of thousands of people, then that's not okay. That's very problematic, right? Because we think that the concentration of power is in the hands of a few who are likely to change the algorithm without consultation, right? When you prefer an algorithm simply because you can change it without consulting people, then you have to give us some kind of surety that you won't even change it to harm the people without even their consent with something. When an algorithm becomes predictive and thinks that this might happen, when